In this tutorial, we're going to do an introduction to testing in React. For a more general intro to testing, check out my Introduction to Testing with Jest tutorial linked here and in the description. This is Coding with Adam, and let's get to the code. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, like, and share. The testing library that we're going to be using is called Testing Library. Now, this testing library can be used for React or other types of applications that are web applications. By expanding the page over here, you can see all the other frameworks that you can use testing library with. By learning this in React, you're able to take that skill into any other framework that you choose to use in the future. Now, testing library is also the recommended library. React recommends it over their own test utility tools and even recommends it over Enzyme. Now, Enzyme was a huge improvement over the test utility tools in React, but testing library takes it up that extra notch to make it the more preferred library. You're probably wondering, why do I keep saying it's the more preferred testing framework? Well, it's because it has a really simple design philosophy. A lot of the other frameworks like Enzyme or the React test utilities were aware of components. They were aware of the internal workings like state and props, and testing library just kind of takes a step back and says, well, we're going to test this as if it's running in the browser. And if it's running in the browser, I want to click a button. I'm going to look for the text or the name of that button on the screen and then click it. Essentially, that means you're doing black box testing where you don't know how the internals work. All right, so let's get into the testing. The first thing I'm going to do with our application over here is I'm just going to run it. I'll just do an npm start to kick our application up. So while our application is starting up over here, we can start to go look at how this testing will work. Now, if you've done npx create react app, your application is going to have some default files like app.js and app.test.js, but also more importantly, it's going to include the testing library in your packages.json. So this file over here will have testing library, which is what we need. Now, if we take a look at our app.test.js over here, this is an example test that comes pre-packaged. Let's start with the fun part and run the test. So what we're going to do over here is I'm going to click the little plus to give me another terminal. And then within this terminal, all I have to do is type npm test. It'll then give me this dialog over here where it'll ask me, how do I want to watch my test? So anytime I click save or anything like that, it's going to rerun the test. You can do it on a filter that could only run certain file names that match it. What we're going to do is I'm just going to say run all the tests. You can also say only run failed test if you want to. So we're just going to start by running all the tests. So I just typed A and that made all the tests run, and we can see that they're all passing. Now, what are we testing? This is what we're testing over here. We are testing the app component. We've named our file over here so that it ends in test. So we created our component called app.js, and our app.js shows this spinner of the React logo, some text, and some learn React text. With our project, we get this default app.test.js. Let's dissect that a little bit further. So inside this file, we're importing the testing library. The testing library, we're getting the render method. Now, what do we do with the render method? Well, below over here, we have a test that says renders learn React link. So we're testing that this link gets created. Now, what we do with this is we import the render, and the render is then used to give it the app component. So we're also importing the app component. So we say render this app component. That's step one. Then you'll notice that we're also importing screen. Screen, you can think of it as like your way of interacting with the screen. So the screen sees all of this. It sees the component. So since you can see the component with the screen, we can say, hey, screen, look for something that has the text of learn React. So it's looking for this text over here, learn React. The string over here is a little bit more advanced. It's a regular expression with an I over there showing that it's case insensitive. If we really want to make this a lot more simpler and just ignore that aspect of it over there and just change it to learn like that, that might be a little bit clearer. You can see I changed it, click save. It's going to rerun that test and it passed. If that R was lowercase, the test would then fail, but we'll look more into that in a second. So anyhow, as we're dissecting this, we got to this line over here and we used screen to go ahead and find that element, and we get back a link element. Then we're going to use, this is the part that Jest comes in, but what you do is you wrap your link element inside this expect, and then you get a bunch of extra functions. And one of the extra functions that we're going to be using is called to be in the document. So to be in the document, if it's not there, it will fail. If it is there, then the test will pass. and you'll see a pass over here. And this is just a basic test over here. So to make this test fail, we're expecting that there's learn React text. Now I could change this to something incomprehensible, it can't find it, and then my test will fail. But more importantly, maybe my test is kind of the source of truth, and it's saying that there has to be learn React on that page. Now, if I go to my component, I'm just going to jump to that component, and I go ahead and type something like learn reacts or something like that, and then I hit save, we're going to get a failure. Now we're failing because it can't find that learn react text. So we can look through here and we can see which line it failed on. It failed on this line over here. We're expecting that text. So what we need to do is we need to update this over here so that it is the correct text. Click save, and then our test will be passing. To take this a step further, we're going to go write some more of our own tests. What we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new component called counter. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go to src over here, create a folder called components. Then inside that components folder, I'm just going to add a new component called counter.js. Inside counter.js, we're just going to define our component. I'm just using a few shortcuts here to quickly create a component, but you can see the basic structure there if you want to follow along. And then I'm also just going to do a couple of imports just in case I need them. So we'll zoom the screen out and we'll kind of close that there. So we've created a basic component called counter. And then I'm going to go back to the app.js over here. And so our tests don't fail. I'm going to just delete some of our stuff on here. So let's see, I'm going to delete everything except for our little anchor over here. So basically we're just left with a div. It says learn React. So our tests will rerun and they won't fail. So then inside that div, we're just going to get a counter. So we want our counter to be over here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to import that counter from components and get that counter. And then our application will be running and our tests will be passing. Let's just start setting up our component real quick. This basic component that we're creating. We're going to give it a start value. So it's going to start counting from a particular value. We'll just say 10 over here on the screen. Then inside the counter, we'll go inside that component over here. We'll destructure that start value. And I'm just going to set up a little bit of state. So we'll have a count value, a set count, and that will be equal to use state with the start value that we get. Okay, and then inside our div over here, what I'm going to do is just add another div, and we're going to say count colon, and we're going to display the count value. So then on our screen, we can see a count of 10. Now let's go write a test for this. For this project, I'm just going to keep the test files next to our actual component. So inside the components folder over here, we have the counter.js. I'm just going to add a new file, and that will be counter.test.js. And this is where we'll write our tests. Now to make it simple, if we really want to, we can go to our app test.js over here, and we know that we're going to need these same imports, the render and the screen. So we'll go back to our counter.test.js over here and paste that in, and you can see we're already getting a failure. It's letting us know that one of our test suites have failed. You can see we have a past test, and it's letting us know that we have an empty test suite. Your test suite must contain at least one test. So this is good so far. So now that we have this imported over here, we're also going to want to import our counter, and that will just come from the same directory that we're in since it's in the same place. And we have our counter. Also, you might be asking, what's a test suite? Well, a test suite is each and every single one of our test files we have over here. So app test is our one test suite, and this is our second test suite over here. So now, just like the test that we have over here, we want to follow the same structure. You're calling test with a name. So what's the name of our test? And then an anonymous function over here. Let's write our first test back in our counter test file over here. What we're going to do is we're going to define a test. We're going to say test, and we're going to do loads and displays correct count. Then we're going to give it a function, and that function, that arrow function that we're going to define, is where we're going to do all the work. Now, same pattern that we did before is we're going to do a render. Our render is going to take in our counter, and our counter, remember, has a property called start. We'll set that start value to 99. It doesn't have to be the same value that we're using in our code. and I'll make sure that's a self-closing. So there we go, we have our render method. Now you can see we start getting a pass because, well, nothing's failing at this point. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our count label. So we're gonna use that screen object over here to look at the screen and find that value. So let's do that. We're gonna go screen, and we're gonna use a different one this time. We're gonna use query by text. So this one won't throw an error if it can't find it. And the value that we're looking for is 99. So this is the text I'm gonna expect on the screen. Then what we'll do is we'll check that it exists. So if I click save here, we shouldn't get any failure because even if it doesn't find it, it doesn't fail. But the place that it can fail is when it does the expect over here. So the count label, we're going to expect it to be visible, which means to be on the screen. We'll do that expect, and now we get a pass. But what if I put a different value? Let's just confirm that our test is actually doing what we want it to do. So I put 98 and it didn't find it, and we got a failure. And if we look at our failure over here, we'll see where it failed. It failed exactly where I wanted to. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a bit more functionality to our application. I want to have an add button. When I click the add button, I want the count to go up. And we're going to be using test-driven development to do this. So we're going to write the test first, then write the code to make it work. Let's start with that test over here. So let's go ahead and add a new test. And we're going to call it clicking add increases the count. Then we'll give it our arrow function that we have over here. And inside that arrow function, once again, this is where we'll do all the work. First thing we're going to do is we are going to render that counter. We'll render our counter start value. It's going to say is equal to 5, so that's just different from my others. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go look for an add button. And the add button, we're going to use our screen.getByText, and we're going to be looking for a button called add. Then once we have our add button, we need to click it. So how do we click it? Well, testing library kind of solves this for us. There's something called fire event. The fire event can be used like this. So we're going to say fire event, and then what you do with it is we say click, and you give it the element whose click event you want to fire. So right now, our test will be failing because it can't find the add button. Before we fix that, let's continue writing our test over here. After the add button gets clicked, we're going to expect that this 5 over here becomes a 6. So we just do exactly the same thing that we did before, and we say const count label equals screen.query by text, and then we're going to look for that count value to go up. Before it was 5, and now it's going to be 6. And then we just do exactly that same thing again. We do an expect. We expect our count label to be visible on the screen. We'll expect that to be visible. Our test will run right now and fail. Let's go ahead and make this test pass. So this test over here is expecting that there's going to be an add button. Let's go implement that add button on our counter.js. So below here, we'll just add a button, and that button, we're going to give it the text of add. The next thing for our test we'll need to do is we're going to add an on-click event. Because as you recall, we are expecting that there's going to be a click. And if we go back to our test over here, we can see that we do a fire event click on that add button. And then we expect the number to go up. We're going to be changing our state. So on click over here, we can just do an arrow function to keep this simple. And we're going to call set count. And we're just going to say our count plus 1. And then that will increase our count. And then we should get a passing test. And there we go. Our test is now passing, which is perfect. Well, let's go ahead and add another test. So for this test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this one. At the moment, we're testing that you can click the button once and the value goes up. Let's test what happens if we click the button twice. So clicking add twice increases the count. So over here, the count is starting at, we'll just change the number to 7. We get our add button over here, and then we're clicking it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate that line over here and just copy that and paste it on the next line. And now we're going to click that button 2 times. We'll get that label and we're going to expect it to go up by 2. So that means our number will go from 7 to 9, and then we'll run our test. So I'll click save, and we'll see that our test count will also go up as well. So now we have 4 tests and 2 test suites, and that test is passing and working just as expected. The next test that we're going to want to write is a remove button so we can decrease the count. Now, I encourage you to pause the video right now and just give this a shot yourself. Then come back and we'll write the rest of the solution. and you can see how I did it and compare it to the work that you did. If you did pause it, that's awesome. Thank you for giving it a try. So let's take a look at the solution. All right, so we're going to start once again by writing the test instead of writing the code. We'll go ahead and add that method, and we'll say clicking remove decreases the count. And then we'll go ahead and add that arrow function. And then once again, we're going to go ahead and just render that component. So we're rendering the counter, and we're going to give it a start value of 5 this time. And then we do exactly the same thing as we look for that remove button. So we just use our screen to get it by the text. And then once we have that remove button over there, what we want to do is click the remove button. And we're just going to do that with the fire event.click and give it the remove button. And then once it's clicked, we can go ahead and get that label. So to save time, we can just copy that text from above since it's exactly the same thing. There's a lot of repetition here. Normally you kind of refactor that out, but since we're just learning it, it's okay to have duplication. So now we're expecting the value is going to become 4 on the screen. Click save. Our test will still be failing because it can't find the remove button. Let's go ahead and implement that on our counter. If we implement it correctly on our counter, then our test will pass. So I'm just going to duplicate that button and put remove. Instead of plus, I'll just put -1 and save it. And now we'll save it. And the cool thing is we've been doing all tests. We haven't even touched the application. We can try the application right here and we can see that it works. Now we got that remove working. And if you go too far with the remove, you notice that we go into the minuses. Do we want our application to go into a negative value like that? Maybe not. So let's go ahead and write a test for that so that we can't go past 0. Before we implement that, let's just add one more test. So before we had that test for clicking the add button twice, let's do the same thing for the remove button. Really simple to add. I'm just going to copy the test that was there and then just change this to clicking remove twice decreases the count. And we'll just duplicate that event for the click. And then we expect the value to be 3. So then you'll just see our test count will go up to 6 and all the tests should pass. And now we can go ahead and implement that boundary check. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. Create another test and the test will be clicking remove cannot decrease value below 0. So we'll go ahead over here and add our arrow function. And then we're just going to just copy what we have there before, and I'll go ahead and delete what we don't need. So let's see, we're going to start our value. We're going to start our value at maybe 1. So then when I click remove over here, that'll bring it down to 0. When I click it over here, I'll bring it down to -1. So if we were testing for -1, that would be a fantastic test, and then it would pass. But we said that's not allowed to happen. So if I click remove twice, it'll bring it down to 0, which is okay. The first time I bring it down to 0, second time I bring it down to -1 over here, which is not okay. So now we've written the test, we see the failure, and now we go fix it inside our counter.js over here. Whether you know it or not, you've been doing test-driven development all this time because we're writing the test first, and then we're writing the code. So inside our counter.js over here, what we're going to do is we're going to modify our remove method. So we can't remove the value below 0. So let's go ahead and modify our onClick over here so that it just becomes a function that we execute called onRemove. Then we'll define an onRemove function over here. Just since we're adding a little bit of complexity, might as well pull that out into a function because it's no longer quite as simple. And then what we're going to do inside this function over here is we're just going to say if the count -1, if that value is greater than or equal to 0, let's pull that actually into a variable too. So we'll do over here const result is equal to count -1, and then we'll say result is greater than or equal to 0. Then we're allowed to set that count. We can say set count and give it the result. And maybe even better name than result could be new count if you want. So we can see our test is passing, which is fantastic. And what's even better now is when I change my code, I can do it with confidence. Because if I make a typo or a mistake, let's say I was renaming this to new count and I added an extra letter, well, maybe I'll get a compilation error, or maybe my test just won't run. If my tests aren't running, that's also a very bad thing too. But if I get this working properly, then my test will be passing as well. So there we go. We have our new count. Our test is passing, and we can confirm it on the UI as well. If I click remove, I get to 0 and I can't go past 0. And our test is actually really great as well because it tries to go beyond 0 as well. The other boundary test that we can add real quick is click remove cannot decrease value below 0, and we'll just say when starting value is 0. So we're going to start our value at 0 here just to make sure that if we started at 0 and we clicked remove a bunch of times, that it wouldn't break. And you can see that the test is passing. I hope that this video has given you a good introduction to testing with React. I plan to make more videos on testing React as it's a very complex subject and there's a lot of different things you need to test. For example, testing REST APIs. How do you test those endpoints? How do you mock objects out? How do you test only one component when you don't want to test the subcomponents? These are topics that I plan to cover in future videos. If you have any other suggestions, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and share.